Oh, I think we're live. I believe we're live. Let's have a quick double check as we do every week. Do you like my purple lights, by the way? We're live. All right. So, or as usual, couple settings. All right. First off, do you like my lights? This is a new setup. It's just my that way. It's just my little light that I use sometimes to light faces. I'm using it as a hair light. I thought I'd go purple, offset the green. Tell me what you think. I think I like it. Um, Today, as you can see, we're talking about weight selection. So, weight selection is a topic that I think is actually kind of underrated, and not for the reason that you might think. A lot of people, when they think weight selection, they just think, oh, what's my top set going to look like? Or what's the biggest number that I'm going to do that week going to look like? But I think that you can look at it in a few different ways, whether it's in terms of your warm ups or how you necessarily think about those top sets over time. And you can and by doing that, by looking at those kinds of things, it gives you the ability to kind of be more productive in your sessions without necessarily putting in more effort necessarily. So what we're talking about today isn't going to be an effort thing at all. Like, there's going to be a little bit of prescription stuff where you decide how much you're going to put in, but it's not going to be about necessarily putting in the most effort in one set or less in another, but it's going to be more about how you squeeze more juice out by choosing your weights more effectively throughout your session. Um, and I think that that's important because if we go through our all of the different things we do in life essentially to continue to develop forwards, um, there's a bunch of things that you can do that add extra friction to get better, right? Like, rocking up to the gym is hard to do. There's a bunch of things you can do to make it easier, but initially it's quite hard. Especially if you don't necessarily just enjoy it or aren't drawn to it. Um, there's things like nutrition. Nutrition can be very difficult to actually do well. Um, but then on the flip side, if you look at it, there's other things that don't actually take any extra effort, and they let me fix this. There's things that don't take any extra effort, and they actually have quite a big ROI. So whenever you can do one of those things that have a really big ROI, then you may as well do it. One of those things, the probably the simplest example is good technique, right? It actually sometimes takes less effort rather than more effort to be able to put in really, really good technique. Sometimes more if you're doing tempos and stuff like that. But generally, if you nail your technique with the same amount of effort, you are able to have a much bigger outcome. So I think that that's a really good way of thinking about it. And I think the weight selection fits into that category. Um, so, first off, when we look at weight selection, there's the element of how you prescribe it or how you necessarily decide what you're going to do going into a session. Now, for beginners, this might be a little bit more advanced, but essentially, this is the idea of going into a session with a thought of number and how you react off of that. Now, I think that in the past, what was quite popular was very rigid decision making around it, right? So if you would follow the best athletes in the world a while back, it probably would have been just, okay, on this day, you're going to hit this percentage of your 1 rep max for this many reps, and that's it. And there's no wiggle room. Since then, we now understand that there's lots of different factors that can affect how much effort you can put in or how much output you can create, rather. Sorry. Um, so, if we're able to think about the certain outcome that we want, which is typically a proximity to failure or a certain speed away from our best or whatever it is, um, we are able to accurately identify what the goal outcome is of the session and what the goal outcome is of that exercise to then give us an output that we want. So, for example, we might say that we want to get to a certain percentage, but you have a bit of wiggle room. We might talk about like necessarily having like plus or minus 5 kilos. Okay, so if my 1 RM for ease sake is 100 kilos on a lift, and we say that I'm going to hit a 4 rep set at 75% of that 1 rep max, then we might say as a general rule that I want you to start at 75 kilos, but if you need to start 5 kilos less or 5 kilos more because it's either feeling really difficult or really easy that day, then that is fine. We might use a system like RPE. So RPE is rate of perceived exertion, which is just, we want you to get to an 8 out of 10 difficulty. We want you to get to like pretty difficult, pretty close to failure. Or we might use RIR. By the way, little asterisk, sometimes people write RPE and they mean RIR. I think that it's fine. I use RPE as a scale, but I keep RIR in the back of my mind. But essentially what RIR is reps in reserve. So if we say that you have 2 reps in reserve, then that means that realistically, if I had a gun to your head, then you would be able to do 10 reps instead of the 8 that you did. So those are systems that are a little bit more adaptable to where you are on a day, because if you program in, and oftentimes I'll program in a set of squats and we might have 3x4, and it might be to an 8 RPE. So I want them every single set to get to the point where they could probably do about 2 more. And the really good thing about this is that we can scale it over time. Over the weeks, we might go up in RPE so that we get closer to like that 4 rep max or whatever the number is for that block. But then the other thing is that even if that person comes in and they're feeling really exhausted from work, or they're feeling really good because just the training week has gone really well, then they have that option to go a little bit higher, a little bit lower than what they were thinking otherwise. I would still recommend though, when you have an RPE, going in with a number that you think should be roughly it. Yeah, don't get married to the number, but if you think that you should be sitting around 100 kilos that day, then aim to start at about 100 kilos. And then as you finish your last warm-ups, we'll talk about warm-ups in a second, but as you finish your last warm-ups, then you're going to be able to make a more educated decision on it. So that's where our decision on how we necessarily prescribe difficulty is important. And just by prescribing a level of difficulty going into your section, already weight selection is going to get better, because just by virtue of the fact of you have a goal to get to, or like something that needs to happen in the session, then all of a sudden that decision making is going to be there. It's going to force you to make a decision. Whereas if we just say you're doing 3x4 squats, it's very easy to cruise through. And the problem when you cruise through like that is that often you don't actually recognize the progress that you had. I'm going to tell you a really quick story with one of my clients. Let's call them, for privacy's sake, Joe, right? So I had this guy called Joe, and he was doing his RDLs, and he was stuck at RDLs at about 70 kilos, I think it was. And he would rock up to his session, he'd put 70 kilos on the bar, and he'd do his 4 sets, and then he'd go home or move on to his next exercise. And every single week he'd rock up with 70, and he'd do 70, and the first set it'd feel really, really tough. So he's like, cool, I think that's going to be where I'm at today. The second set felt a little bit better, but not that much better, but it still felt heavy. And now, because he was fatigued, that third set, he actually just stayed at 70 again. And he reached out to me, and he's like, asking me why, because he was quite concerned about the fact that 70 kilos was where he was stopping. And what we actually did and what we found was that the way that he was approaching going into his RDLs wasn't setting him up to hit a really good set. And because he didn't have any intentionality behind how he was doing things, he didn't really have something to work towards. So he just threw 70 kilos on the bar because he knew that he could do it, and then he felt garbage at it as he went through. So the tool that we used for Joe was starting to implement a warm-up and having that goal weight to start with. So what I would do is, rather than prescribing for all 3 sets, I prescribed for him that we wanted to do, I think that he was sitting at about 5 reps on RDLs. So I think I prescribed him something to the effect of like 70-75% for his starting weight of what a 1RM would be. So if you look at that establishing out, it's probably about like the 90 mark. So we had that starting weight. It was going to be around 70, 75. But because he had that starting weight, I also asked him to warm up to it. And even though he can lift 70 kilos right off the bat, he wasn't going into them warm and understanding the technique fully and all that kind of stuff. And it meant that that first set felt worse. And that's why he thought, oh, I can't go up from here. So instead, for 70 kilos, we went 20. We went and then went 50. If he wanted to, because he wasn't feeling great, he could do like a couple of reps at 65. And then he would go to his first set. Now, with his first set, just like I was saying earlier, we gave him 70, but he could go plus or minus 2.5 kilos. So he could decide to go 72.5, or he could decide to go 67.5. And essentially what happened is he came in, he did his 20, the bar, his 50, and then he did his 65. And then first week, he actually decided, I think I can actually take a little bit bigger of a jump, hit 72.5. Perfect, right? 72.5 actually felt pretty good. So when it felt actually pretty good because he had done those warm-ups, he went and did 75. And then in the last set, he stayed at 75. Now, I would have even been happy if he went back down to 70 because already we've added 2.5 kilos on our first set and 5 kilos on our second set over the previous week. But he stayed at 75 because he genuinely felt pretty good about it. And then the last set, he did tell me probably felt a little bit harder than it should have. But that being said, he made that jump straight away simply based off of a warm-up and having a goal and somewhere to work towards. So that next idea that we're going to talk about here with your weight selection is actually use your warm-up to help determine what that first weight looks like. And the way that I think about warm-ups is that we always want to have a bigger build initially and then fine-tune a little bit closer, right? So let's say that you have a set of 8. Maybe let's say 3 sets of 8. It doesn't really matter how many, but let's say 3 for now. You'll see why in a second. So for that first set, we want to hit a certain weight. Again, let's use a round number. Let's go 100, right? If you think that 100's on the cards for today, then what I would want you to do is make bigger jumps initially, but we always start with the bar, yeah? I talk about respecting the barbell. It's just something that I like to do. And it's a really easy way to get a feeling for if things are feeling on, right? Because no matter what, especially as you get stronger, maybe not initially, but as you get stronger, you can move the barbell, right? But if technique just feels a little bit funny, yeah, or if it's just not moving as like fluidly as you would want it to, depending on the exercise, of course, it might change, but you can generally feel it out a little bit from that from the barbell, and you can let that influence your first few warm-ups as well. If all is moving well though, we probably want our biggest jump to be in that first one. So if we're going 20 kilos, just the barbell first, we might jump to 60, just slap on 2 20s on there. Yeah. That first jump is going to be a decent one, right? But you can feel it out. You can kind of like go nice and slow generally. And if you're going to a set of 8, I'd probably aim for about a set of 8 here as well, right? You want to go roughly the amount that you've got there, maybe a bit more, especially if you've got low reps. If you've got like 3 or 4 reps, you might want to smack out a few more reps here. And the reason for this is, number 1, we want to feel out our technique. And number 2, we want to actually like have the muscles like switch on and get a little bit of mind muscle feel, right? So if we can get that in that first little, if those first 2 sets, that's perfect. Those first 2 warm-up sets have achieved what they needed to achieve. Now that's 60 kilos, obviously just scale it on what you're getting to, right? If your number is just 30 because you're benching 30 that day or squatting 30 that day, you might go from 20 to 25 and just have those 2 warm-up sets. The bigger the number, the more warm-up sets you'll probably need. So let's go back to our original example, 100 kilos. We might go then from 0 to 60. We might then go to 80. Yeah, we've gone from a 40 kilo jump to a 20 kilo jump. Again, feel it out. We probably need less reps though, right? So if you were doing 8 or if you're doing 10 reps on that, on those first couple of warm-up sets, then the next jump, you might only do 4 or 5. Yeah. Then from 80, you might want to go straight to 100, depending on how it's feeling, how much data you think you've got. I would say that it's also okay to go to something like 90, 92 and a half, somewhere that's a little bit closer, probably like within about 10% of what you're going to be lifting that day, and just do 1, 2, 3 reps. Yeah, something like that. And that last one is just to hone in what it's actually going to feel like when you unrack that bar. Because it's a very different feeling just lifting up and moving the barbell, especially when you're lifting a decent amount, compared to actually unracking to some weight. Yeah. The reason we only go 1 or 2 reps is because we don't want to accumulate fatigue yet. Yeah, we don't want fatigue from those warm-ups. We want the fatigue to come from our actual working sets. So use that actual, those actual warm-ups to build up there, but without accumulating fatigue. And then we would go to our working weight. So to get to 100 just then, we used 20, we used 60 for about 8 reps each. We used 80 for about 4. And then we used 90, 92 and a half for about 1 or 2. That's 4 warm-up sets. But if you fly through, because it's actually pretty lightweight compared to what you're going to be doing on that day, you should be able to fly through it pretty quickly. And beyond that, the time is worth the input. The juice is worth the squeeze, because what it lets us do is it lets us, one, decide on a better weight for that starting set. We might get to 92 and a half, decide that things are flying, and use a little bit more weight. Whereas if we just went straight to 100, if we went straight from 60 to 100, we might not necessarily be able to make that decision. And also the value is still there if you go down. And the other thing is that first set will feel better. And if that first set feels better, then you're able to make better decisions about the second 2 sets. So far we've spoken about how we choose that starting weight coming into the session, percentage-based RPEs, have a number when you come in. Then we've spoken about how to warm up to it. Now, for those ongoing, for those next 2, 3 sets, however many sets you have for the day, it's really important we're just adjusting based on that last set and giving ourselves the decision based around how much we think that we can recover. So if you're going to take really long recoveries on it that day, maybe you're going to take like 4-minute rests, depending on the lift, of course. But you might take longer recoveries on that day. You can probably do closer to that number or a bigger jump, right? Whereas if you do less rest and recovery, then you probably need to make smaller decisions and changes, right? A little bit more conservative. And then that decision is purely just based off of what that last set felt like. So if you're aiming for an RPE 8, but you felt like you could only do 1 rep, go down a little bit, pull back. Yeah? And it is fine as you go through to go up and down. Yeah? You're just testing the waters. You're feeling it out. As long as we're getting close enough to that like weight that's going to be actually useful for us, depending on the lift, then you're going to be able to just kind of like play through it and see, oh yeah, my technique felt really good. I can go up a little bit. Oh, you know what? Pulled back. Let's go down. You know what? I might stay again because it felt good enough, but not good enough to go up. Yeah. And you can make that decision. Okay. When you're going through that, you want to make sure obviously that you're staying within a productive range. And generally that productive range for like strength, hypertrophy, kind of things. So the things that are like more muscly, fatiguey, then you're going to be looking for an RPE 6 or above, or that also kind of lines up with an RIR of 4 reps. So you want to be within 4 reps of failure. If you can finish a set and do another 10, then you're probably not actually going to be getting any development. Whereas if we go, if you finish and you can only do 2 reps left, if you can only do 3 or 4 reps left, then that is going to be productive training. When it's about power, it's about speed, okay? It's about how much speed we can produce repeatedly. So you might not necessarily get a big drop off throughout your reps, but we want to make sure that we're actually moving the bar with speed. That's going to require a little bit more nuance. I would encourage you to do a little bit more research on what you're necessarily trying to get out of it, or use your coach if you have a coach. But you need to as long as you stay within that productive range, you can adjust each set however you go. And that's where like gut feel comes in as well, right? Like if you finish your first set, you're like, I don't think I can do another set of that, then change it, right? Change what you're doing, change the amount of weight. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The last thing that I want to talk about is for your like max out attempts. So for your like 100% zero RIR, 100% attempts. I would just say, just make sure that in those warm ups, you are not over fatiguing yourself throughout it, right? So as you build up, make sure to cut the amount of reps that you do really early on, even if it's like a 5 RM. Cut the amount of reps that you're going to do really early on. If it's a 1 rep max, obviously you can probably get away with just 1 reppers. Probably from like about the 60 or 70% mark of your 1 RM of what you perceive your 1 RM to be. If you're like 5 RMs and that kind of stuff, you might want to go a couple more reps. So you might want to keep it at like 2 or 3 reps in your warm-ups, but just making sure that you keep it lower so that you're not accumulating too much fatigue. Additionally, your rest breaks are probably going to resemble more like what your working sets would look like earlier, right? So if we want to go to a max of 50 kilo, or we're trying to max out 50 kilos on our bench, right? We might start with the barbell, which would be a 15 or a 20 kilo barbell. You might then make a jump to like 30, 35-ish. Then you might make a jump to 40, 42 and a half-ish. And then you probably want one last attempt at 45 or 47 and a half that is just a clean rep for one. Yeah. I would say if you're going towards 50, then you probably want that last attempt to be 47 and a half. If you feel like you might be a little bit too cooked to get there, 45 is fine. But for those max attempts, use all the same principles that we've spoken about here. Just adjust the amount that you're doing just so that you don't overcook it. But yeah, that is weight selection for you. As I said, really, really important topic so that we can make better decisions around our training. I would just encourage you to think about these things going into sessions, because it's going to help you just perform better throughout it and potentially do like get more out of that exercise or that session. And like I said earlier, if we're able to do little non-consequential things that don't take effort to get more out of it, then that's going to be really productive for us, especially on the long term. As usual, thank you for rocking up, but also let me know if you have any questions. I want to be always working through and answering things that are actually relevant to you. So comment down below if you've got any questions. And yeah, open up the conversation from there. Otherwise, I will talk to you on the next one. I'll see you later. Bye.